Welcome to the 7 core management behaviors, when and how to use them. This is our final module, Module 7, Review. This series is brought to you by John Dario and the Retail Management Formula, LLC. We have finally come to the last of our 7 core management behaviors. The object of review is to connect the dots among all of the feedback, both corrective and praise feedback, in order to paint a picture of overall performance. Review should provide an overall picture of trends or patterns in performance over time. I'm going to use a bit of a corny gimmick here to demonstrate how reviews should work. Imagine you are actively engaged in doing follow-up and you give on-the-spot feedback in a series of individual instances. Each of these dots represents an instance of follow-up and feedback that you gave to an employee. Each piece of feedback stands on its own as a separate conversation. Without connecting the dots, it's hard to visualize what kind of big picture they form. Do these separate instances create a positive overall assessment, a negative overall assessment, or something in between? Now imagine a review conversation that draws lines to connect all of these dots. The review conversation brings all of the separate instances together so that an overall picture can be formed. What picture does this review conversation create? I'll help you out. The big picture here is an A, meaning the employee's overall performance is great. It was hard to see the A when all we had was a bunch of scattered instances of feedback, but when we pulled it all together, the picture became clearer. Okay, I told you it was going to be corny, but let's make it a little more real. Here we see a series of individual situations that have occurred with an employee over the last few weeks. In each of these situations, we gave the employee coaching or feedback, but each situation is a little unique. For example, the employee didn't miss a project deadline more than once, and the employee didn't forget to return a call to a customer more than once. So is there a bigger picture to be formed by connecting these dots? You bet there is. Each situation is a symptom of the bigger problem of this employee not having an effective system for their own personal organization. Being disorganized is creating a wide variety of problems in the employee's performance, so a review conversation should address this bigger picture. Okay, so let's check this out on our management situation grid. Here we see that review straddles the 2 quadrants on the right of the grid. This means that review is to be used during or after employee performance and in situations where employee capability is either high or low. Let's make sure this checks out logically. First, does it make sense that review happens after employee performance? Sure it does. There's nothing to review until the employee actually performs the behavior that's being reviewed. So this checks out. And what about review being used when employee capability is both high and low? Well, we know reviews can be good or bad, right? And we want to give feedback on overall performance, whether performance is good or bad, right? So this checks out as well. Now that we've confirmed review's placement on the management situation grid, let's talk about the 2 types of review conversations that exist. First, there are formal review conversations. These are typically documented as part of a structured process. Formal reviews are generally done at a specified time, often at the same time of year for all employees or based on employees' anniversary dates. And formal reviews are generally mandated by the Human Resources Department. A formal cycle might include 1 annual review, 1 mid-year checkpoint, and 1 90-day review for all newly hired employees. The other type of review is an informal review conversation. This might be a verbal conversation, and it's generally an ad hoc discussion that happens when it's needed rather than being set for a specific time. Informal review conversations are done based on manager judgment and discretion, rather than being mandated by a central Human Resources Department. There are lots of reasons for a manager to decide to do an informal review with an employee. It could be done to give a new employee a check-in or a progress report. It could be done as part of a follow-up to a corrective feedback conversation. It could be that the manager notices the employee might need some extra attention, possibly because they are uncertain of how they are doing, because circumstances have changed, and that has impacted their confidence, or for any number of other reasons. And it may be that the employee just hasn't had a good review update in a while, and the manager wants to keep them motivated. There doesn't really need to be any special reason to have a review conversation with an employee. They should be held regularly so that employees always know where they stand. Now let's take some time to talk about tips that will make review conversations most effective. Tip number 1 is to use specifics to support general statements about performance. There are two styles of review conversation that can be used. Style A starts with the specifics and leads up to a general statement about the performance. For example, the manager communicates several specific data points, in this case data points 1 through 4. Then the manager ties those points together with the overall big picture statement. In our example before with the employee who is disorganized, this style would have the manager repeat the 6 different symptoms and then say something like, "These seemingly different issues all point to one big picture about your performance. They are all the result of an ineffective personal organization system." Style B starts with the general big picture statement and then reviews the specific data points that support the general. In our case of the disorganized employee, the manager's presentation might sound something like this. "I believe you're having a problem with personal organization. Let me review several individual situations from the past couple of weeks that all seem to be symptoms of poor organization." Either style is as good as the other. It's all a matter of which is most comfortable for you. The important point is that both the individual data points and the big picture should be communicated, and the data points should be used to support the general statement. Tip number 2 is to balance the good with the bad in review conversations. It's very rare that an employee is either 100% good or 100% bad. Effective managers will balance the big picture message and leave the employee with some positive feeling about the things that have gone well and with some understanding of the things that have not gone so well. Tip number 3 is to be direct. The whole point of a review conversation, whether formal or informal, is to let an employee know where they stand with regard to overall performance or trend in performance. A review is useless if the employee walks away with confusion or an inaccurate view of where they stand. But direct doesn't have to be blunt or disrespectful. Through careful word choice, thoughtful balance, and appropriate tone, direct can mean polite, considerate, and encouraging. We will talk more toward the end of this module about the types of messages that can be sent during a review conversation. For the sake of this tip, just be sure that your message is clear, understandable, and direct. Tip number 4 is to connect behaviors with results. Let's face it, retail managers run businesses, and the purpose of businesses is to generate profit for the owners. So that result, profit, is the thing that managers strive for. And the point of engaging in certain behaviors is that they have been proven over time to give the best chance of maximizing profit results. So, good behaviors lead to the best results, and bad behaviors lead to the worst results. Keep in mind that these relationships are all relative, and other factors can also influence results. For example, opening of a new, strong competitor in the market can produce bad results no matter how good the behaviors are. But if you believe in the good behavior, good result, bad behavior, bad result concept, a manager can minimize the negative impact of the new competitor by engaging in the right behaviors. The behaviors results grid on the screen in front of you is a way of visualizing the potential situations a manager may face. In the top right quadrant, behaviors are good and results are good. This is the way it should happen. When holding a review conversation with an employee who's in this situation, the manager can feel confident that the two things are linked and an ideal situation exists. In the bottom left quadrant, the employee's behaviors are bad and the employee's results are also bad. This is a clear problem, and the manager can confidently address the fact that it's an unacceptable situation. The other two situations are a bit more complicated. In the bottom right quadrant, behaviors are good, but results are bad. This could mean one of a couple of things. The behaviors may need more time to take effect and produce good results, or the good behaviors may be offsetting some other more powerful negative impact, so the results are actually less bad than they otherwise would have been. In the top left quadrant, behaviors are bad, but results are good. This means that success is coming because of some external factors, and better results are being missed out on because of the bad behaviors. In any event, the most effective review conversations will discuss both behaviors and results, and we'll talk about them in the context of this grid. Tip number 5 is to focus on headlines. The New York Times is a big newspaper, and each day's edition contains hundreds of stories and thousands of words. But each day, the most important story is featured on the front page with a big, attention-grabbing headline. If every story was allocated the same amount of space and was printed with the same size, title, people would have a hard time figuring out what was most important for them to know from the day's edition. The same holds true for review conversations. When a manager rambles on and on about multiple subjects and fails to make anything in particular stand out, the employee leaves the conversation without understanding the most important message or messages. Managers must be sure to be clear about the headlines and focus the majority of the review conversation on the things that are most important. Tip number 6 is to communicate an overall performance message. A manager may, and should, by the way, pass along a mix of positive and negative feedback. Remember tip number 2? So it's entirely possible that without a clear overall message from the manager, an employee may walk away from a review conversation wondering whether the manager is happy or not with the way they are performing. But it's not always as simple as yes, I'm happy or no, I'm not happy. A manager's assessment really has 2 dimensions. The manager can assess an employee's performance against an established standard, or the manager can assess performance relative to a contextual situation. Let's take the example of a brand new server in a restaurant. On their first busy Saturday night, the server gets some orders wrong and gets a few complaints about slow service. Should the manager be happy with the server's performance? Well, when measuring versus the standard of making 0 mistakes on orders and receiving 0 customer complaints, no, the manager must assess the new server's performance as bad. But in the context of this being their first Saturday night shift, and perhaps allowing for other problems such as short staffing in the kitchen and so on, might the manager be happy with the new server's performance? Sure, especially if the new server did better than other new servers had done on their first busy shift. The review message grid on your screen gives a high-level view of the types of messages that are most likely to be relevant in review conversations. The top right quadrant is used when the assessment versus standard is good, and the assessment within context of the situation is also good. This is an easy message. The employee is doing well and should keep up the good work. The bottom left quadrant is when performance versus the standard is bad, and the context provides no good explanation. In this case, the review message is that the employee is not getting the job done properly and must make improvement. The bottom right quadrant is when performance versus standard is good, but performance within context of the situation is bad. An example of this could be that the employee has been performing at standard for a while, but progress has stalled and they are coasting along without any further improvement. The message in this review situation is the employee has become complacent and needs to work harder to push for more. And the top left quadrant is when performance versus standard is bad, but the context provides acceptable explanation or rationale. This is like the new server we talked about a few minutes ago. The message here is that the performance is not yet at standard, but the employee is headed in the right direction and should keep making progress. There's an ironic aspect to the management behavior review, and this is a good way to wrap up our course. Review is not only about assessing the employee, because it will also serve as an assessment of the manager's effectiveness with the 7 core management behaviors. For example, an employee should never be surprised by messages given in a review conversation. If a manager has properly used the behaviors of follow-up, coach, praise, and correct, issues discussed during a review conversation will be repetitive from past conversations. Sure, there might be some added emphasis or some extra content provided in a review conversation, but the information itself should not be new. If it is, something was missed with the management behaviors along the way. Employees should be engaged in the review process. If an employee is not an active participant in the conversation, it generally means they are not bought into the process and perhaps they don't have enough respect for the manager. That's also a sign that something has been missed along the way. Even in the worst case where a problem employee is disrespectful during a review conversation, it is likely that the progressive process of the correct behavior has not been implemented effectively enough. Feedback from employees during the review process should be positive. Each review conversation should involve some level of two-way dialogue. If all has been done well along the way, employees will be appreciative for the way the manager has behaved and for the effective review conversation. And most importantly, the bulk of the employees will fall into the top right quadrant of the behaviors results grid and the review message grid that we discussed earlier. Remember that the point of our jobs as managers is to help our employees to be successful. If you are consistently having review conversations where employees are failing, it means you aren't doing your job as a manager very effectively. And that's really the best way for us to end this course. Managers do not exist to boss people around or to punish them when they do something wrong. Managers exist to get work done through the team of employees, and that means it's our job to give them everything they need to be successful. If that's the only meaningful message you got from this course, it was worth your time. That brings us to the end of Module 7. I hope you've received some good value from the videos. Thank you for your time.